The reason for brushing your instruments of any kind under the water is to prevent aerolization. So I always tell people, why would you want to splash pieces of who knows what and pieces of people up into your face? Because I'll see techs, they got the instrument up close to their mask and they're just scrubbing away. And I'm like, okay, under the water. You don't want to aerolize any of the bloodborne pathogens or bioburden or anything else that's on there because it does fly all
over. Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal: to help you fight dirty, every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
Joining us for this episode is Carol Malone, Supervisor of Sterile Processing Education for University Hospitals. We're talking about brushes today, Bobby. And, we covered this a while ago, but it's been a little while since we have really focused in on brushes. But I think it's impossible to fight dirty without good brushes. Am I right?
That's right. Yeah, it's the most important step in the process. You can't get it sterile you can't get it clean, or as you might say in Texas, Hank, it ain't sterile if it ain't clean. So this one's gonna be good. You might say it's got me bristling with anticipation.
Oh my gosh, here we go. Here we go with the puns. Okay, well, let me just tip you off if you're tuning into the show. We're not going to get to everything there is to say or to think about brushes, so tune in and keep some notes. If we don't talk about your favorite thing about brushes or your opinion about brushes, we want to hear it in the comment section anywhere that you see this episode out there on social media. Get ready. We're going to dive into brushes with Carol Malone in just a moment.
I'm Bobby Parker.
And I'm Hank Balch.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
Join us now is Carol Malone, Supervisor of Sterile Processing Education for University Hospitals, member of our Beyond Clean Advisory Group, and the host of a little video series you may have seen out there, and there's more videos coming, called Simply Sterile on the Beyond Clean YouTube channel. So, Carol, this is not the first time that you've done anything out here with us on Beyond Clean, but welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. It's nice to be here.
So we're going to be talking about brushes on this episode. And, we have had a vendor spotlight in recent days talking about a particular type of brush. We've had brushes come up occasionally throughout the seasons, but the last time that we really jumped into brushes was like way back, maybe season 1. And you got a tough act to follow because we interviewed Lindsay Brown way back before she joined the Beyond Clean team talking about brushes. But it's been almost 6 years, right? So I know we've got a ton of new listeners. I'm sure there's a lot of things that have changed in the world of brushes. And hopefully there's a lot of things that have stayed the same if they're good best practices. But we're going to clean the slate off and start from scratch in this conversation to really dive into the topic. So I'm pumped. I know when I was emailing you about, coming on the show, I was like, hey, what topics do you want to talk about? You're like, hey, I've got some opinions about brushes. And I was like, all right, well, we've got a show just for you and that topic. So let's start off before we get too far. We're going to have new technicians. We're going to have new students who tune into this episode. We're going to have folks maybe who just haven't thought a lot about the tools that they use in decontam in a long time. So how would you describe what the cleaning brush is and what the purpose it serves in the sterile processing workflow?
Well, I would describe a cleaning brush as one of our most important tools. It definitely gets in places we cannot get into, and it does things we cannot do. So I definitely think it's one of the most important things we have in our arsenal to fight dirty, if you will.
Oh, you're talking my language. So what are these weapons made out of? What kind of material would you likely see if you just pick up a random surgical instrument cleaning brush out there today?
There's the two main types you come across. The first is your nylon bristle brush, which comes in many forms. They are plastic toothbrush-looking nylon bristle brushes. I've seen some other ones that fit more in the palm of your hand. There's some specific for like your acetabular reamers and stuff, which are swirled and twirled and have cones and things. And then you have your brushes that you can run through your cannulated items, which some have colored beads on the end, some don't, some run through, some don't run through. So there's all sorts and types. And then you have your metal bristle brushes, which we are more and more getting away from. As you read more IFUs, you'll see that the manufacturers are more specific to nylon bristle brushes for a lot of stuff.
Yeah, that debate around those metal brushes is a vibrant debate out there, but I think you're right. You know, the trends are just getting stronger and stronger toward nylon. I know when I started as a new technician, I was a fan of the metal brush. Don't hurt me. Because, I mean, nothing worked as good as those metal brushes for getting out a lot of the grime and stuff that we were getting off of manual instruments. But I understand the arguments, but I know that, especially when that really started gathering steam, maybe 2011, 2012 out there, a lot of technicians just did not even want to hear that. And they would hide those metal brushes back in decontam from managers, from educators, because they wanted their secret weapon in order to actually get these things clean. So always a fun topic of conversation. But let's talk about what brushes you should not actually be seen back in decontam. So you mentioned the ones you should, but what are the types of brushes that are actually shouldn't be in that area?
I mean, I've seen a lot of crazy things. You know, things sneak in from, you know, EVS or the kitchen. You'll see Brillo type pads. You'll see brushes that are really not meant for our type of cleaning. And back to a previous comment you made, something that will assist new technicians or old technicians with use of nylon brushes is that as we follow the IFUs closer, if we do more rinsing and soaking, especially the soaking piece, those nylon brushes will really do the trick. So that's a piece of education to kind of get people away from that metal brush as well.
That's a great technician tip out there for our listeners. And Carol, as you're talking about all these different types of brushes that could or should be in there, from the acetabular reamer brush to the long lumen brushes or the toothbrush handle style brushes, can maybe you unfold a little bit for our audience what brush they should be grabbing for the job? How do you decide what's the right tool for the instrument that you're trying to clean in front of you?
Well, you know, we do really try to educate to the IFU. As an educator, I spend a lot of time elbow to elbow with not just new techs, but with experienced techs, because we work with our manufacturers closer. They have a lot of tools for us to figure out which brush to use. They will do a great job in servicing our staff. They'll bring lots of samples in for us to try. They will, you know, do elbow to elbow at the sink with our techs as well, just showing them, hey, listen, you have that cannulated item. Here's the right size brush, or here's a chart where you can put the brush in the hole. You can hold the item up to the chart and figure out what size brush you're going to use.
If you had it your way, Carol, that chart I absolutely love. I've never heard of that being one of the manufacturer resources out there. But going back to the IFUs, huge shout out, right? If you had it your way and you could write your own IFUs, or if you had manufacturers who are listening today who make cannulated lumen items, what kind of communication, like how would you like them to put this brush information in the IFU? What's going to be the most helpful thing for technicians to figure out the compliant brush?
In some instances, it would be nice if they would consider the standard brush sizes when they're making instruments. I know that's a very big wish.
I mean, think about us when they're making instruments.
I know.
Who are you?
A dreamer. because there have been a few instances with, I think they were ENT instruments, they were so thin and tiny and narrow that I could not find a brush to clean these items with. Went back to the manufacturer, like, we don't make brushes, we just make the instruments. Went to several different reps and couldn't find a brush to stick in this instrument. So it would be nice if there would be some collaboration on, both sides, the brush makers and the instrument makers, to collaborate and come up with ways for us to clean these things properly.
Yeah, that response of we make the instrument, but we don't make brushes is half-baked at best, because there's a user out there who's not as diligent as Carol Malone is in hunting down that instrument. And somewhere there is a clogged suction tube because of it, because we just don't have the tool to do the job. You mentioned a couple of times, particularly with these lumen brushes, of finding the right size brush, which is super important. I know that I've personally crammed too large of a brush down a lumen and gotten it stuck in there. So stuck, in fact, that it took a lot of maneuvering to get it back out. Maybe had to use some orthopedic pliers to assist in that in ways they weren't intended to get it back out of the instrument. So how do you know if you have the right size one? You mentioned different colored beads as an organizational system to help technicians out with that. Maybe tell us, what is your preferred way of organizing them to make it easy for our technicians?
We deal with a couple different manufacturers, and they do provide us brush racks. So the brush racks are color-coded to the beads that's on the brush. So it's got a part number, and that tells us what size, like suction or tubing, that it, the measurement that it will fit down into. And obviously, I don't know the specific size of every instrument that's in my hand, but as you process, say your Fraser suctions and things, more and more you get used to, okay, a 12 French gets this brush, or a 7 French gets this brush. So you kind of start to make the correlation of what size brush goes into what size lumen that you have. And then sometimes it's just trial and error. I know we have another manufacturer who has, I was mentioning this chart. It's kind of a plastic chart. There's holes in it, and you can hold your lumen up to the chart and figure out which brush you need based on which, hole your item matches up to, which is very nice. Actually, it's very helpful. I too have shoved brushes in things, in my career that, either one, the brush is not big enough, so it's not hitting the insides of your instrument, or if the brush is too big, you have now bent the bristles back and they are not making good contact with the inside of your instrument. So you're defeating yourself on both sides. So, the correct size is really, really important. And then, again, there's those instruments that they don't make the correct size. So you kind of got to make sure you soak, make sure you flush with, your gun, your water gun, and pick the best brush that's as close as possible.
No, that's really good. And assuming that we've got a brush to do the job and we're standing now at the sink with the right brush selected and the instrument in hand, walk us through how to use that brush. What kind of techniques ought that technician be using? Are there right ways to use it, wrong ways to use it, and so forth?
Well, sure. So if we had a cannulated item that we're sticking a long, metal brush through with the bristles, once you've got the right size, everybody wants to just stick it in there and just, go to town, brushing it in and out. Well, that's actually not the correct way. We're actually supposed to take it, and as we're passing it down through the instrument, we're actually supposed to be spinning it and then pulling it out and spinning it back out. And the reason for the spinning technique is because the way the brushes are manufactured and the way that the nylon bristles are twisted into the wire, that is the way that they are made to be most effective to clean our instruments. So everyone thinks, just scrubbing the heck out of it back and forth is going to get the job done. And it's actually causing damage, scratching. And when you look with your borescope down some of these things, it's horrifying to see the mess we have created. But yet that's the old way of doing it. So we have learned through our manufacturers and our in-servicing, after you soak it, a slow, gentle twist in, twist out, twist in, twist out is the best way to do that with those types of brushes.
And then with those brushes and with the toothbrush style, I'm sure all of our listeners who are either going through or have gone through a certification process will have heard repeated, dozens of times that brushing should be taking place under the surface of the water. Can you tell us why is that, and any tips or tricks to be able to do that safely?
Sure. So the reason for brushing your instruments of any kind under the water is to prevent aerolization. So I always tell people, why would you want to splash pieces of who knows what and pieces of people up into your face. Because I'll see techs, they've got the instrument up close to their mask and they're just scrubbing away. And I'm like, okay, under the water. You don't want to aerolize any of the bloodborne pathogens or bioburden or anything else that's on there, because it does fly all over. There have been studies that show that those droplets and particles are traveling, I think it was 10 to 13 feet or something across the room. I was like, oh goodness. So yeah, we don't want to be spreading all the stuff all over the place. And then just a second piece on the water is, I'm always telling technicians, fill your sink with the water first and then disperse your enzymatic. You don't want bubbles. You don't want bubbles in your water for a couple reasons. One is because they're harder to rinse off. And for two, you don't want to be rinsing into water where you cannot see, because you're going to get stabbed, poked. Something not good is going to happen. So scrub under the water and make sure you don't have bubbles.
Yeah, speaking of getting stabbed, that's probably another argument against the wire brushes, because I have gotten a lot of those in my hands and palms through the years. And there could be a few things dirtier, I think, than the decontamination wire brush to get yourself with. But on the topic of, the practice of brushing, the techniques here, what about the single use versus the reuse of our brushes? Where do you kind of stand? What's your practice or protocol for how many times can you reuse a brush? Is it infinite? If not, where do you draw the line? And then how do you approach, if you are reusing brushes, what's the practice around doing that correctly?
I have several thoughts on that, actually. So I call them my reusable disposable brushes. So, you take the wire brush that's new, you take it off the rack, you use it to clean, maybe a cysto set or something, not terribly dirty. You haven't destroyed the bristles or mangled them or mashed them all down. I suggest tossing that in the tray, letting it go through the washer with that set, and then it gets passed back through the window. It's supposed to. And then you can reuse it maybe one or two more times. Some facilities that I go into prefer to throw that brush away after each use. So I like the throwing it away after each use. If they want to reuse it, again, you have to examine it. If the bristles are missing or if they're matted down, it needs to be thrown away. If they're not, you brushed one Fraser suction with it. It can go through the washer to, clean and disinfect it. It could be reused a few more times, but as it wears out, it needs to be thrown away. Or as those wires get bent, I walk into a site and I'm always like, okay, I'm going to take the rotini off the brush rack now. And I just start throwing things away, because how are you going to put that through a lumen when it's like a rotini noodle? It's not going to go. I guess I go both ways on that one.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and, time in our industry, honestly, because there's not a ton of clarity out there in terms of guidance outside of the manufacturer's device IFU that says, hey, you need to brush. And then IFUs of the brushes that we're getting, many times there may not even be an IFU of the brush itself. And there's even rarer do you see any kind of reuse, disinfection IFU for the brushes if they're able to be used multiple times. But in addition to the model you described of kind of sending it through with each tray that you process, we've heard of at the end of the shift, kind of gathering all the brushes and putting them in a tray, go through the washer at the end of the day, especially. But some kind of protocol, this is the takeaway for this section of the interview. You need some kind of protocol if you're going to be reusing your brushes of when are they no longer good to use. And, Carol, like you brought up some really good inspection points there. And that can happen after the first use, depending on how brutal you are with the brush. Or, they could go multiple uses, multiple cases, multiple days if they're handled appropriately and if they're disinfected per your brush IFUs and per your department policy. And that's the other takeaway that I'll just kind of throw out there. You'll want to have a clear policy. If you're disposing after every use, what is a use? And if you're reusing, the process and the expectation from your technicians to do that's got to be in the policy. The last thing, and I'm the one pontificating here, but I'm going to throw you another question here, Carol. But the last thing that we see all the time in our consulting events is we go in and they've got a very clear policy, but then they're just not following it. the practice is not lining up with the policy, and that's an instant boom. That's an instant citation from Joint Commission when they can look at what your policy says you should be doing after every shift or every use. And then you got a technician who's like, I didn't even know that we had a policy. And so I'm definitely not following it, so you really need to hardwire that into your training and practice. Let me go into brush ordering real quick, because you talked about, hey, we need the right brushes. We got to get them organized. Want to follow IFUs. We got the training technique down. But then you're in full PPE as a technician. You clock in. You're ready to get to work. And the first lumen comes through your sink, and you look up for that one brush that you need, and it ain't there. How do we make sure that that brush is there every time, Carol?
So there's actually a couple things that we've been working on here. So the first thing is that we're working on getting the techs to stock their work area before they start working. Now, they can be in PPE. You have to be in PPE to walk into the work area, but stock your work area before you start working. And more importantly, clean up your sink and stock your work area when you're done so that it's ready for the next person. So we've really been having a big push to do those two things, which will help keep that brush rack full, because we just hung up pretty new brush racks. And then the second thing is that you as a technician, if you are stocking your area and you notice when you go to the stock bins that, they're either low or empty on that one size brush that you need to get to the person who does the ordering. Either email them, call them, leave the empty package on their desk with a note, whatever it takes. There needs to be the communication, because, even the best of people who walk the shelves on a daily basis, still may miss something. Or, you have a heavy week of whatever those brushes are used for, and you just go through them. So there's just a couple different ways that, that can all happen seamlessly. And
just like that previous discussion, I think your point is that there's got to be a process in place, an agreed upon way that we're going to do things, because depending on each technician to figure out their own way, or hopefully the person who pulled that last one out of the drawer is the high-performing technician who's going to be responsible enough to notify somebody. Hoping's not a plan. It's the point. You got to have a policy. So speaking of department policies and the way that we do things, I've got a controversial question to ask you, Carol, and that has to do with the age-old dispute about brushes on the clean side. What are your thoughts on that? Are there any variety of brushes that do belong out there on the clean side? Should departments have a policy about this, or is it dirty side always? What are your thoughts?
My first knee-jerk reaction is no. So brushes on the clean side, as we've talked about, has definitely been a long-going battle. So, AAMI doesn't allow us to do any cleaning on the clean side. And unfortunately, if a brush is there, chances are it's going to be used for cleaning. So to prevent that, my personal feeling is we should not have brushes of any type on the clean side. There are ways to check lumens that do not require a brush. There are testing, packets and things out there that we can utilize for that process. There's the borescope. There's other ways to check lumens and to check inside of things without using a brush. So my feeling is no, they should not be there.
Sure. And I guess the thinking behind the departments that have it on the clean side, because I don't think any department that's going to have a wire bristle toothbrush style handle brush on the clean side has any ground to stand on. There's no argument that that's a checking device, right? That is a cleaning device. But where we see that come up a lot, as you mentioned, are those departments that maybe don't prefer the pipe cleaner style lint-free swabs and would prefer to have that nylon bristle cleaning brush to use as a checking device only. And so your advice then would be find another method other than using a nylon bristle cleaning brush on the clean side.
Yes, there are processes and things that we can purchase to do those things safely without having the brushes there. And then, like you said, the metal brushes have no place on the clean side whatsoever. They should not be in the sinks, the hand wash sinks. They shouldn't be anywhere on the clean side, because the whole tray should be going back to decontam if there's a dirty instrument.
No, that's really good advice, Carol. And to our listeners who may be some of the holdouts with the nylon bristle brushes that are still on the clean side for checking lumens, at the very least, you need to have clearly documented what those are there for in competencies, because if you have anything that could be interpreted as a cleaning device and it's residing on the clean side and you don't have people who can speak to why it's there and demonstrate in writing why it's there, then you're just asking for trouble. I would also challenge you to go take a look at the current edition of the AAMI guidelines and what it has to say about cleaning brushes on the clean side, even as a checking device. And I think you'll find yourself to be challenged.
So, Carol, for anyone who wants to send any hate mail to you, if they're, I'm just totally kidding. But as you have surfaced in this interview, there's a lot of gray area still today in 2023 going into 2024 about the place of brushes, the function of brushes, the techniques of brushes, the compliance of brushes. You would think as an industry, we would have already settled this very important aspect of what it is we're doing with cleaning, with inspection. But clearly, because these conversations are still happening, there's gaps in understanding. There's disagreements out there. So a big takeaway for me is we need, as an industry, to talk about this more. And we need to try to push toward a standardized approach to an understanding of how we get the right brushes on the manufacturing side, as you mentioned, kind of connecting the two. Hey, the manufacturer of the device with the brush manufacturers themselves, getting that information into SPD. Is there anything else that you kind of see out there as a gap in this brush conversation that we haven't already talked about before? Is there any last words that you would want to leave to manufacturers of devices, to brushes, to maybe other educators, to technicians? What else would you like to say on the topic of brushes?
Goodness, you got me on that one. I mean, there's so much to say. It would be nice, definitely, to have brushes to clean every item and a little clearer way of figuring out what brush to use for what item. I don't know what the answer to that would be, but I'll work on that.
Okay. All right. Well, you have your homework. And I want to thank you again, Carol. A great interview, great conversation. And I know there's going to be people that listen to this to say, hey, I got something else to add about brushes. I got another insight. Here's another best practice. We love these conversations. The reason that we do these podcasts, you cannot cover everything there is to say about the topic in 20 or 25 minutes. We know there's still conversation to be had. So drop it in the comment section on social media, wherever you see this podcast or hear this podcast, and reach out and get connected with Carol through LinkedIn. She's on LinkedIn, constantly posting great educational content on there too. So what I'm trying to say is, we're not saying the last word on brushes. We're continuing the conversation. We want that to continue to happen out there in the world of cyberspace as well. So, Carol, thanks again for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
And that was Carol Malone, Supervisor, Sterile Processing Education for University Hospitals. Bobby, man, this brush conversation, I cannot get enough of. Kind of a nerd about it. And like Carol brought up and like we kind of closed the interview, there's still a lot to talk about that's undecided. Like we're taking our positions kind of in each corner of the ring, but the fight ain't over yet.
Yeah, you got that right. And it's fun having these conversations, particularly with users. I love that she's in a sterile processing department, like connecting with frontline technicians. And a lot of what we talked about was just the practical day to day of how do you pick the right brush and how do you succeed when you've got that weapon in hand. And I think that's really great. The one question we always ask people, and we didn't quite get to ask it yet, is like, what does the future of brushes look like? And I don't think any of us have a clear idea of what's to come.
Yeah, at the very end of the interview, she did bring up that, hey, like there's got to be some kind of solution for the compliance piece of this. And it reminded me of an article that I wrote a couple years ago for the AAMI BINT journal on trying to get to 100% compliance of brushing. And, one of the solutions I got to think is tying in our tracking system with these unique devices and then identifying at the point of cleaning in decontam, you've got a cannula in this tray that requires this size brush, and then getting all that data into your tracking system at the very least. Now, that doesn't solve the physical inventory piece of, is that brush actually there when you need it? And that's why we asked that question about that. But one other topic that I just wanted to bring up that I forgot to ask her about was the timing of your brushing. So we talked about brush techniques, but also in these IFUs, I see a major gap out there in practice is it doesn't just say to brush. It doesn't just say to brush with the right size brush. It says to brush for 30 seconds or for 60 seconds or for 90 seconds. And a big giveaway for non-compliance is if there's not a clock with a second hand or with seconds at your sink, there ain't no way that you're correctly brushing for 30 or 60 seconds. So if you're listening and you don't have some kind of timer at your sink and you don't have that specific IFU information for these trays that's accessible and easy to see at the point of cleaning, you've got opportunity, but you ain't alone because the whole industry needs to work on that. So let me just throw that out there for any innovators who can help us solve this problem. All right. That's going to do it for this week's show. And I just want to remind you, as we do every week here at Beyond Clean, thank you for listening and keep fighting dirty.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Beyond Clean. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing to Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on iPhone or Android. Simply search for Beyond Clean in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. We look forward to hearing from you.